Hey everyone, I'm Natalie Bencivenga, host of 5 Minutes With, and this week I am really excited to have with me Jasmine Cho. I've been wanting to interview her now for a while, and I want to make sure I get this all right. So she's a baker turned artist turned cookie activist. Yes, you heard that right. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
I love your background. I think it really speaks to your work.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping, that it would bring some, there's sprinkles, so obviously the baking connection, but a little bit of joy and fun.
Beautiful. And speaking of joy and fun, your cookies, you've become really a national sensation around what you've done with activism through baking sweet treats. So can you talk a little bit about your origin with everything and how it started?
It's funny because I feel like actually it's interesting that you framed the question that way. You said origin story, and I was thinking of superheroes this morning
Yeah.
too. But usually people ask, the way that question is asked is like, how did you get started and everything? But when you say origin story, it actually really connects a lot more deeply to my childhood, identifying as an Asian American, and like kind of learning that along the way as I grew up, and constantly feeling uncomfortable, like, and questioning, like, oh, where were the Asian Americans, like, in American history? Like, I don't think I'm the first Korean person to be here in this country. I was born here in '84. So yeah, when I think of my origin story, it connects back to all the identity issues that I really grappled with from childhood throughout adulthood. And then as far as like how baking came along, it was just something that I loved and fell in love with, particularly in high school, when I was taught by a friend of mine. And I think the element of play, again, like joy and fun, I kind of mentioned that the element of play was really important for me to gradually discover that this particular medium of a blank sugar cookie
Mhm.
was a canvas that I could really thrive with. So I've always felt that whatever work or calling that I felt, you know, toward should be connected to causes and communities outside of myself. So
Mhm.
I think even though I found personal joy and contentment in baking, I always had that question of what can I do to, like, expand this, magnify this beyond just my personal contentment. And so yeah, the portrait cookies, actually, I think you are also friends with Liana Maniz,
Mhm.
another local activist, but she was the first friend who asked if I could put her face on a cookie. And that's kind of how everything happened. And once her face was on a cookie, everyone was like, oh my gosh, like the face cookies, the portrait cookies were so easy to capture people's attention. So I wanted to use that as my platform for pushing forth representation of underrepresented and even misrepresented communities, particularly my own Asian American.
No, that's really beautiful. And I remember when you were at TEDx, I got to hear your story. You spoke so beautifully about how these cookies have been a way to heal, for people to acknowledge some of the systemic issues in a way that's palpable and palatable, so to speak. But you've since shifted gears, right? And you've sort of moved away from cookies because you've gotten so many more opportunities to just speak on these topics. So how has that pivot been for you, especially during COVID?
Right. It's actually been really liberating for me personally because, I started out just as a baker, and these face cookies were merely face cookies in a way of like a unique product for celebratory moments. Like everyone was like, oh my gosh, I want to do portrait cookies for this wedding or a birthday or something like that. But what my main message was again, like that whole idea of using portrait cookies as a new and unique way of engaging people to think and converse about topics that are otherwise difficult to digest, about representation and everything. So I haven't like totally stepped away from cookies. I have stepped away from cookie orders in a sense, and shifted at the beginning of this year, actually, where I declared Yummyholic being on an official hiatus, which was my online bakery, and instead kind of trying to move forward under my personal name, Jasmine Cho, as an artist. That puts a lot of responsibility and accountability on me too, personally, I feel, and just, yeah, connects me a lot more intimately with my work. But yeah, I started kind of getting a lot of invites after TEDx for public speaking, for educational workshops. So instead of doing orders, I'm using cookies continuously as a medium for discussion and education in like these different manifestations of, yeah, like workshops and speeches and stuff like that.
And that's beautiful. And you know, the last thing I wanted to ask you is, in this moment, right? Your work really has mirrored what's happening collectively in the larger realm of justice. What are you hoping for to see, not only for you and your personal brand, but collectively as a large, as we step into a world, you know, hopefully someday post COVID, but also with Black Lives Matter movement and all of these changes about us. So what do you hope to see?
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, like I think after having been interviewed a few times, the questions land on me differently. So most recently, when I was asked, "What is it that you do?" I really thought about that again, and my ultimate goal has always been, with my cookie art, is to make people pause. And I think this pandemic has really encouraged that pause moment for the collective, you know, not just in our Pittsburgh community, but beyond, around the world. And that pause, you know, right now I'm studying art therapy. I'm getting my master's in that too. But that pause is so important to our mental, spiritual, bodily health as well. But it's just been very fascinating to see that impact kind of ripple out, like collectively all together. So I think, and I hope that that pause is really activating people, which again was always my hope with my cookie art, is make people pause enough to reflect and then to act with more intention and clarity. So that's what I think I'm seeing already a ton of right now. And I just hope that it's not a trend or a fad, but it really sustains beyond whenever we do find a vaccine, I guess. But yeah.
I appreciate you so much, Jasmine, for joining me. And I hope you'll come back and give us another update on what you're working on. And I've always been so inspired by you. So thank you so much for taking 5 minutes with me.
Thank you so much for having me again.